He was fired just for daring to speak the truth. But what the CEO didn't know was that a hidden camera was recording everything. The main lobby of the skyscraper glowed under golden lights. Glass walls soared upward, reflecting passing silhouettes towering as if to swallow everything whole. The sharp echo of leather shoes striking marble reverberated coldly. In the middle of that lavish space, an unexpected scene was unfolding. CEO Richard, dressed in a fitted black suit, a crimson tie blazing like fire, stood tall at the center. His face was rigid, his eyes gleaming with contempt. In front of him, David, the night security guard, remained upright, shoulders trembling slightly, but his gaze never lowered. In his hand, a half-finished paper coffee cup still gave off a thin curl of steam, vanishing into the chill. "Who do you think you are?" Richard growled, each word slamming into the floor like a hammer blow. A murmur rippled through the nearby staff. They pretended to look at their phones, but their eyes darted sideways. David swallowed hard. His voice was rough but steady. "Sir, I was only doing my duty. I couldn't stay silent when I saw—" "Silence." Richard cut him off, his tone snapping like a whip. The sound ricocheted through the lobby, making everyone flinch. "A lowly guard thinks he can lecture me on how to run my company." The air froze. A receptionist dared to glance up, then quickly bowed her head, faking busyness. David still stood there, his hand crushing the coffee cup until the plastic crumpled. Richard stepped closer, just an arm's length away. His voice dropped, but the venom in it was unmistakable. "You've just buried your own career. From this moment on, you are no longer an employee of my company. Get out, now." A sharp breath broke the silence. Someone fumbled, dropping a stack of files, papers scattering across the marble floor, but no one dared bend down to gather them. For a few seconds, David didn't move. His eyes no longer carried only fear, but a simmering fury held back by sheer restraint. He parted his lips, then stopped swallowing the words that burned inside him. Sweat trickled from his temple, sliding down his cheek. Richard tilted his chin and flicked his hand as if swatting away a beggar. "Leave before I call another guard to drag you out." The lobby fell deathly still. Only the ticking of the wall clock and David's heavy breathing remained. Slowly he turned. His footsteps dragged heavy, as though the entire building weighed on his back. But high above, a tiny security camera blinked with a red light, quietly capturing every frame. No one noticed. No one expected what was coming. The summit. Global Tower loomed over the city center, a massive block of steel and glass rising into the silver-gray sky. Each morning, before the sun could burn away the heavy mist, neon lights blazed from hundreds of windows. Luxury cars lined up outside engines, purring softly, doors swinging open to reveal tailored suits and polished leather shoes. Everyone hurried inside as if every passing second were worth a fortune. Inside the grand lobby, the glow of a massive crystal chandelier spilled across the marble floor. The sharp click of heels and shoes echoed, blending with the clatter of keyboards from the reception desks. The faint scent of expensive perfume hung in the air, mixing with the aroma of fresh espresso from the small cafe tucked in the corner. The atmosphere was cold, glossy, and heavy with power. In a small corner near the entrance sat David, the middle-aged security guard stationed behind a modest booth. The glass enclosure was barely a fraction of the lobby, just enough for an old wooden desk and a loose swivel chair. His dark blue uniform was worn at the shoulders, the buttons chipped. On the desk sat a dented steel thermos beside a paper cup of coffee that usually grew cold before he could finish it. Every morning, David arrived at least 30 minutes before his shift. He checked the cameras, mopped the booth floor, and often switched on his small radio to catch the news. His hands were rough, calloused from years of labor, yet his handwriting in the logbook was always neat, each rounded letter carefully drawn. Others might see his job as menial, but to David it was duty and honor. He reminded himself daily. Keeping this building safe means keeping thousands of lives inside it, at peace. His life was simple. A small rented apartment on the outskirts, an old bicycle for commuting. At night, he cooked plain meals, some rice, a bit of vegetables, sometimes a discounted can of food. Dinner was usually eaten in silence, with only the ticking wall clock for company. But David never complained. He still carried pride in his heart. He wasn't rich in money, but rich in dignity. The contrast could not have been sharper with Richard, the CEO of Summit Global. He was often seen striding into the lobby with his entourage, elevators waiting open just for him. His suits were custom-tailored in Italy. His Swiss watch glinted under the lights, his shoes polished to the point they mirrored the ceiling above. Every step he took asserted authority. Richard was known for his coldness. To him, people were merely tools. A mistake meant elimination. He never cared who had a family to support or who struggled to survive. The only thing that mattered was the quarterly profit report. In meetings, he cut off subordinates mid-sentence with a cold smirk. A single frown from him was enough to silence an entire room. Between those two worlds, arrogant power and quiet devotion stretched a gulf that seemed impossible to bridge. Yet it was precisely that gulf that would spark a tragedy. One late evening, as his shift neared its end, David paused in a dim corridor downstairs. He caught faint laughter, the rustle of papers, and a sliver of light spilling through the CFO's office door. David hesitated, but instinct pulled him closer. Through the narrow gap, he saw Richard, the all-powerful CEO, reaching out to accept a thick envelope. David's breath caught in his throat. A storm swelled inside him. He could have turned away, pretended nothing happened. But his vision blurred. His grip tightened around his flashlight until his knuckles went white. His conscience whispered, "If you stay silent, you're no different than an accomplice." He swallowed hard, heart pounding against his ribs. A turning point had arrived, and he knew from this moment on his path would no longer be peaceful. That night, after witnessing Richard accept the envelope from the CFO, David sat in silence inside the security booth. The fluorescent light above flickered relentlessly, casting a weary glow across his face. The paper cup of coffee in front of him had gone cold, its surface shimmering with thin, oily streaks. He touched it, lifted it halfway, then set it down again. His hand trembled slightly. Inside his chest, his heart pounded in chaos. The images replayed over and over: the fat envelope, the CEO's half smile, the tight grip of a hand concealing a filthy secret. David shut his eyes. The ticking of the wall clock became the pounding of a hammer inside his skull. He wrestled with himself. "I'm just a guard. If I speak up, who would believe me, or would they laugh, accuse me of making it up? But if I stay silent, aren't I complicit? Is justice worth losing everything for?" Outside the city still glowed cars streaking down the highways. But inside that tiny booth, David's world shrank heavy and suffocating. The next morning, he wrote a short report, carefully forming each word. There was no accusation, just the facts of what he had seen. When he signed his name at the bottom, it felt like signing his own death sentence. Noon. The boardroom on the 20th floor. The air was thick. A massive glass wall revealed the glittering cityscape outside, but inside the room the chill was so sharp men tugged at their ties. David stood at the head of the table. His worn blue uniform stretched across a chest that rose and fell with tension. In his hand the report trembled. Across from him Richard lounged back, fingers drumming on the glass table. His smile was thin as a blade. "You think," Richard leaned forward, voice heavy with mockery, "that a guard like you has the right to criticize me?" David drew a breath, forcing himself steady. "I'm not criticizing, sir. I'm just doing my duty. I saw something and I had to report it." A cold, dismissive chuckle cut through the room. "Duty." Richard sneered. "Your duty is to stand at the door, open the gate, greet the guests, not to spy on your superiors." It was as if the air had been sucked out. Staff kept their heads down, not daring to move. Someone swallowed hard, trying to mask the sound. Richard shot to his feet. The chair rolled back, slamming into the wall. The noise made everyone jump. He stormed toward David, jabbing a finger almost into his chest. "You want to play hero? You think anyone will believe you? A lowly guard living off scraps, pennies to your name. Stand against me and you stand against this entire corporation." David trembled. His whole body was taut. He tried to hold his gaze firm, but the paper in his fist crumpled until it was nearly torn apart. His heart screamed, "Don't bow. Don't back down. Get out!" Richard roared, "You're fired, effective immediately." The explosion of his words rattled the room. Everyone froze. In that moment, David's world shattered. He looked around. Not one pair of eyes met his. Not a single voice spoke in his defense. Only silence. A silence as heavy as a verdict. He bent down, picked up the wrinkled report. His footsteps dragged across the polished floor, each echo cutting into his pride like a blade. That afternoon, he wandered the streets. The wind carried exhaust fumes and dust. City lights flared alive, brilliant and decadent, so far removed from the hunched figure walking quietly below them. Passing a cafe window, he caught a glimpse of office workers laughing together. For a fleeting second, he wished he could laugh like that too. But reality was merciless. He had lost everything: his job, his income. All he had left was his conscience, and conscience doesn't fill an empty stomach. He returned to his small apartment, sitting alone in the dark. The room was silent except for the clock's relentless ticking. He turned on the radio, but even the voices from the news felt distant, alien. David asked himself, did I do the right thing, or am I just a fool who pushed himself into the abyss? The pressure bore down, the loneliness suffocating, as if the entire world had turned its back. But he didn't know. In a dim hallway downstairs in the shadows, everyone overlooked. A security camera still glowed with its tiny red light, silently preserving every moment of that noon meeting. Every insult, every look of contempt, every commanding finger. That footage, small, unseen, invisible, was waiting for its day to be revealed. The Summit Global Security Operations Room sat buried in the basement, a place few ever visited. No glass walls gleaming with sunlight. No sparkling chandeliers, just the cold glare of white fluorescent lights pouring down on rows of humming computers. The whir of cooling fans blended with the steady clack of keyboards, forming a dull, monotonous rhythm. Mark, an IT staffer barely in his 20s, hunched in front of the screens. He had just finished an all-night shift monitoring the system. His eyes were bloodshot, his fingers wrapped around an almost empty energy drink can. His daily job was simple: review camera footage, delete useless recordings to free up storage. Repetitive. Boring. Yet Mark performed it carefully. He scrolled with his mouse, opening clip after clip. Hallways, entrances, elevators, people coming, people going, everything familiar. Then he froze. Camera angle hallway outside the 20th floor boardroom, yesterday. Timestamp 11:57 a.m. Mark squinted. On screen, David walked into the meeting room. Out of curiosity, Mark clicked forward. Seconds later, the audio hit his headphones and he instinctively pulled them off, then slid them back on. You think, a guard like you has the right to criticize me? Richard's voice cut sharp cold. Mark's eyes widened, his heartbeat spiked, his fingers twitched against the mouse. He slowed the playback. The screen showed Richard rising abruptly, jabbing his finger at David's chest, voice booming. You're fired, effective immediately. Even sitting alone in the security room, Mark felt the suffocating tension pressing down from the footage. He took a long breath, rewound the video, and played it again. This time, every word sliced through the silence like a blade. David's voice shook but remained steady. I'm only doing my duty. I saw, and I had to report it. Mark closed his eyes. A wave of emotion surged, part admiration, part sorrow. A small guard daring to confront the most powerful man in the company, and crushed within seconds. But the proof was right here, stored in this aging computer. Mark zoomed in, raising the brightness. Details leapt into clarity, Richard's contemptuous glare. David's trembling hands, the heavy silence suffocating the room, all of it undeniable. He leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding. The first thought struck like lightning. What if I release this? Then came the fear, I'm just a contract IT guy. If the CEO finds out I touched this, I'll lose my job. Maybe even face a lawsuit. He stood pacing the cramped room. His footsteps slapped against the tile, merging with the constant drone of the fans. His breath came fast. The can in his hand crumpled with a metallic crack. Then he stopped. His eyes returned to the screen. David's face tight with tension, yet his gaze never lowered. Integrity, rare, fragile, snuffed out in an instant. Mark whispered. He was right. He sat back down, opened the backup program. His fingers flew across the keyboard. The cursor hovered, then clicked copy file. The hard drive whirred, the progress bar crawling across the screen. Mark stared, every second stretching into an eternity. His pulse thudded with each percentage tick. 95%, 98%, 100%. The file saved. Title evidence, David MP4. Mark sat frozen. The room fell into absolute silence. Only the low hum of the machines remained, as if they too were guarding a colossal secret. He pulled off his headphones, exhaled, and understood there was no going back. What Mark didn't know was that above him in the gleaming offices and glass boardrooms, powerful footsteps still echoed. CEO Richard still sat high on his throne. And the video, now in Mark's hands when revealed, could turn everything upside down. Monday morning, 30th floor, Summit Global Boardroom. On the wall, the steel company logo gleamed under the halogen lights. The room was sealed tight, black leather chairs circling a massive walnut table. The atmosphere was thick, oppressive. The board members took their seats, dark suits, tight ties, not a smile in sight. The screech of chairs against the floor sounded like a threat. Outside, the city pulsed with energy, but in here time felt frozen. Richard entered. He carried the same commanding presence as always, black suit gleaming, watch, cold smile. His gaze swept the room, slow, deliberate, confident. What so urgent that it required a special meeting? His voice rang out casual, as if he still controlled the game. The chairman didn't answer. Instead, he signaled the technician. The room dimmed. A projector flickered to life. On the large screen appeared a familiar image, the 20th floor hallway. Richard frowned, narrowed his eyes. Then the audio came. Clear, unmistakable. You think, a guard like you has the right to criticize me? Several board members sat up straighter. A woman covered her mouth. Murmurs rippled around the table. Richard shot to his feet. Turn it off! He barked, his voice sharp as a blade. But the video continued. On screen, he jabbed a finger into David's chest, shouting, You're fired. Effective immediately. Silence. A silence so heavy you could hear hearts beating. Every pair of eyes locked on the screen. None looked at Richard with respect anymore. A board member tapped his fingers slowly on the table. Do you have an explanation, Richard? Sweat dotted the CEO's forehead. For the first time, the mask of arrogance cracked. His eyes darted, searching for an ally. All he found were cold, accusing stares. This footage, it's edited. Obviously manipulated, he stammered. But the video didn't stop. David's trembling but steady voice filled the room. I'm only doing my duty. I saw, and I had to report it. The murmurs grew louder, breaking into shock. Someone whispered under their breath, "My God." Richard lunged forward, trying to block the screen, but two security officers signaled by the board stepped in his way. He staggered, eyes blazing. You don't understand everything I did. I did for this company. His shout cracked desperate, but his words drowned in a rising tide of outrage. Another board member spoke low and firm. No, Richard. You did it all. For yourself. The room erupted. One slammed documents onto the table. Another stood voice sharp with condemnation. Each accusation landed like nails hammered into the CEO's coffin. Richard tried to compose himself, but his hands shook. A handkerchief slipped from his pocket, falling to the floor. He bent to pick it up, but no one cared anymore. The projector froze on the final frame, David's face tense, trembling, but eyes unyielding, refusing to bow. That image hovered over the room, a silent accusation, a verdict. For a moment, the room was dead still. Then applause broke out, hesitant at first, then louder, surging. Not out of glee at Richard's downfall, but because truth had finally been seen. Richard collapsed into his chair. His eyes were bloodshot, his breath ragged. He turned away, unable to meet their stares. For the first time in his career, he was no longer in control. The board began to deliberate. One voice cut through, resolute. We must decide now. A leader like this cannot remain. The lights came back on. Faces were taut, but in their eyes a different light flickered, justice restored. Meanwhile, down in the tiny guard booth, David sat quietly. He knew nothing of what was happening on the 30th floor. Only the soft strains of classical music drifted from his radio. He covered his face with one hand, sighing. He had no idea that the image of his unbending gaze, that single moment of courage, was now reshaping the entire company. And in that instant, justice had begun to speak. But the price Richard would pay had only just begun. 1 week after the fateful board meeting, the atmosphere inside Summit Global had changed. The faces of employees who once kept their heads down now looked up with confidence. Laughter echoed from the lobby cafe. Footsteps no longer dragged with dread, they carried a lightness, as if a dark storm had passed and the skies had cleared. That day, a small but dignified ceremony was held in the grand lobby. The crystal chandelier cast its light not cold and harsh, but warm and radiant. Rows of chairs were neatly arranged with small flags placed on each side. Employees from every department gathered, eyes full of anticipation as they turned toward the stage. David walked in. He wore a crisp new uniform, shoulders squared, buttons gleaming. His face was still lean and weathered, but his eyes no longer carried exhaustion. Instead, they held a calmness and a quiet pride. As he appeared, the entire hall erupted in applause. Not polite claps, but thunderous, heartfelt applause that shook the glass walls. The chairman of the board stepped up to the podium, microphone in hand. His voice was deep, measured. We are here today to honor integrity. When many chose silence, one man chose to stand. He paid the price, losing his job, suffering humiliation, but in the end, truth prevailed. He turned to David. Today, on behalf of this entire company, I restore your honor. You reminded us that justice always needs someone willing to defend it. Applause swelled again, rolling like a wave. David bowed his head slightly. He was not used to bright lights, nor to being the center of attention. His hand trembled as it gripped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice cracked heavy with emotion. I never thought of myself as a hero. I only did what needed to be done. Speaking the truth can cost you dearly. It can strip you of everything. But if we stay silent, the wrong will always win. He paused, scanning the room. Many employees were motionless, eyes glistening. Money can buy many things, but integrity comes only from the heart. Silence hung for a beat. Then the hall exploded in applause, deafening, thunderous, like rolling thunder. That evening, David returned to his modest apartment. He hung his new uniform neatly on the wall. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to sit in his old wooden chair, switch on the radio, and smile. The classical music that filled the room no longer sounded heavy. It was gentle now, like a whisper. You did the right thing. Outside the window, the city lights blazed, thousands of stars clustered against the night sky. David looked out, eyes shining with a flicker of hope. The story wasn't over. The world beyond still brimmed with injustice. But at least today he knew this: the truth will always find its way. And somewhere out there, another camera blinked quietly, waiting for the moment when justice would be seen again. The screen slowly fades to black. The office clamor disappears. In its place, a piano lingers, each note delicate like raindrops falling on a still lake. A scene appears: the tiny security booth, its weak yellow lamp casting light on a cracked wall. The swivel chair sits empty. On the desk lies an open notebook, a few trembling words left behind. Integrity is the last thing I have to hold on to. The camera pulls back. The little room shrinks against the glowing tower above it, a reminder that sometimes a simple act can shake an entire world of power. A narrator's voice, low and steady. This story reminds us, justice does not always arrive at once. But the truth always finds a way to be seen. And sometimes it takes only one person's courage to change an entire space. Silence. Only the piano carries on, tender and haunting. Then the voice returns, softer now, like a friend sitting beside you. Have you ever witnessed a moment like this? When an ordinary person dared to stand for what was right, and everything changed. Share your story. Integrity, justice, belief. If this story touched you, don't forget to leave a comment below. Like, share, and subscribe. So together we can keep spreading stories that matter. And finally, the whisper of a question lingers in the dark. Would I have the courage to do what David did?